Hi, this is partially a follow-up to my video on the patriarchy paradox, which was a lecture delivered by Will Noland and just my thoughts on it. Um, so this video is partly a follow-up to that, but just on that story, the head teacher of Eton, Simon Henderson, has defended his decision to suspend Mr. Noland and written to parents explaining why, saying that he values freedom and tolerance. So the implication is that the lecture, and I put a link in my last video, you can see it for yourself, somehow contradicts that. Now, what Will Nolan done was challenge some feminist narratives. Um, the argument that you're defending tolerance by being intolerant strikes me as pretty much absurd. And the thing about the Will Nolan case is he may be an Eton lecturer, but it doesn't mean that he can just um, fall back on his laurels with being suspended. Apparently, he's on a moderate salary, so he could actually be, and he has a grace and favour house with the job. So he will literally be homeless by Christmas because of this suspension. Simon Henderson knows that. So I can understand the anger against Simon Henderson. I think it's an ideological decision based on pandering to woke ideology. That's very, very concerning. You look at that lecture, it's provocative, but I don't think anyone can rationally say it's bigoted or inciting hatred of anyone. It's challenging feminist narratives, but it's it's just a crazy world that we're in. Anyway, one of the things that came up in that lecture was all the issues that are faced by men around the world, men and boys. One of the things that often comes up in these discussion is the prevalence of male suicide. Um, Take in the UK, for example, the number of men who commit suicide is roughly 3 to 4 times the number of women. We have sadly over 5,000 suicides a year in this country, and the majority of those are men. Now, issues like depression can affect anyone, any social class, any racial background, male and female. For example, women are probably more subject to postnatal depression, although it can affect men as well, actually. But there would be certain gender-specific forms of depression, I would imagine. So what I want to look at in this video is why is it there is such a discrepancy between the number of men and women who commit suicide. I came across one study, and I didn't look at it in depth, so I can't comment too much about it, but I recall seeing a study saying that whilst more males, and by males, this could include teenage boys, um, whilst more males commit suicide, um, more women are likely to consider it or to have attempts, but not necessarily go through with it. Anyone who knows anything about clinical depression will know that more often than not, suicide attempts are a call for help. Now, in my own life, I know women who have suffered clinical depression and have been suicidal, people close to me. For the sake of the privacy, I'm not going to go into details, but um, I know that it can affect anyone. I know that it can affect women as well. But there has to be a reason why there's a discrepancy there. Why is the rate of actual suicide so much higher for men? Um, I don't think there's any one single answer for this, but I do think there are a number of things that we could look at. And I'm talking here just as an observer and as someone who myself has went through clinical depression. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a sociologist. I'm just speculating here. So this is genuinely just my thoughts, okay? I'm not saying this is an exact science. I'm not saying my words are the truth. I'm just speculating. Because after all, I'm a man and I've been through clinical depression, and I think it's important that we're open about these things. So, by the way, it's not applicable right now. I'm feeling relatively content. I wouldn't call myself depressed at the moment. I'm not overly joyous, but then again, who is in 2020? Um, I've got my issues in life, I've got my concerns, but certainly I've had bouts of clinical depression, and believe me, I've been through much worse periods than this. But anyway, um, one area, if we look at financial insecurity, now, financial insecurity can affect men and women, okay? Poor people can be male or female. There is again a discrepancy when we look at the homeless. Most homeless people are men, but there are homeless women as well. So anyone can fall through the cracks. But I would argue that whilst women can suffer financial insecurity and everything that comes with that, the anxiety, the stress of, having to really, really tightly budget, that sort of thing, I do think that there is a unique stigma on men. After all, very, very, very few men look for a financially stable woman in a relationship. It's barely a factor. But there are a lot of women, if they're being honest, would want a financially stable man. Now, most women will bristle at the idea that they want a wealthy man because they know that looks shallow. It looks like, oh, well, they're just being a gold digger. But if they're being honest, I think they would want a financially secure man. And I'm not condemning that. I'm not criticizing it. It's fine. It's sociological development, which actually Will Nolan covered in his lecture, because financial security is a form of protection, and men are the protectors. That's something that has come about from evolution in human societies the world over. So it's understandable. But with that does come, therefore, a stigma to guys who are not financially stable, a unique stigma. I mean, I would honestly say that there isn't the same level of judgment to poor women that there is to poor men in terms of relationship status. I mean, you might have a situation where a poor woman or a woman who is suffering financially finds herself in a relationship with a rich guy. She might be kind of unfairly smeared as a gold digger, like just in the relationship to get financial stability. But a poor man is basically seen in the world of relationships as not achieving. And most women would have the subtlety to not be judgmental to his face. But I also think most women, if they're honest, will want a man who's financially secure. So think of the consequences of this. The man is then seen as a failure when it comes to a fundamental area of success, which is relationships. This creates anxiety because he thinks he's going to be lonely for life, or at least until he gets financially secure, which is a lot easier said than done. That goes without saying. Um, and there's a stigma with that, you know, if he's expected to be the provider and he can't. I mean, when we think about male suicide, this can be single guys, it can also be fathers. So, in the case of fathers, could that be that they feel they're not providing what their family requires and they're under enormous pressure? Who can they turn to? In the UK, we have a charity called the Samaritans. It's a great charity. I mean, the concept is that they listen. They're volunteers who listen, and the strength of it is the fact that they are strangers. So there's less of a sort of pressure there than there might be in telling people that one knows. But they can only do so much, and clearly there's still a problem with male suicide. In my city here in Sunderland, we actually have little notices on the Wearmouth Bridge. If you're in the northeast of England, you might know this. Just little hopeful messages trying to dissuade people from committing suicide, because historically that's been a suicide spot. So I do think that financial pressures is one of the major things. But individuals have their own situations, and this wouldn't explain how wealthy guys or guys who are more financially secure commit suicide, because that also happens. Um, so what's the situation there? Could it be that they're going through clinical depression? Maybe they feel dissatisfied in life. Maybe they're in a loveless marriage. So they're financially secure, they're outwardly successful. They've got they're in a leadership position, they're in a stable job, but they're just not happy. And maybe they can't bring themselves to tell their girlfriend or wife because they don't want to hurt her, but they're unhappy. And then, there's been a long-standing thing that men won't seek help, and that's something that's probably true. I think on average, probably men are more reluctant to seek help, even for medical things, outside of mental health, just general physical medical problems, than women are. Again, one point Will Nolan made in his lecture is how often do you hear women being called wimps? It never happens. And if it did happen, if a woman was accused of being a wimp, or even cowardice, there's far less of a stigma on a woman than there is on a man. I mean, take cowardice, for example. Women can be cowards, in a moral sense. Give me 1 second. Chris, I'm making a video. Just give me a minute, please. Yeah, I didn't want to close this video. So, women can be accused of cowardice, but I think that historically, I mean, the stigma was always on men. Women were never shot at dawn. If a woman refused military service, for example, in times of conscription, where there was a unisex situation, and the example Will Nolan gave was during the first Chechen War, there's no stigma there, but there is a stigma on men. So, there's clearly a discrepancy there. Um, I think one very big area is parental alienation. I'm broadly sympathetic to the fathers' rights movement. I don't agree with all the tactics, but the mental health impact of fathers alienated from their children. These are good fathers. And we're not talking about layabouts who don't care and don't give support and that sort of thing. I'm talking about men who really do care and, you know, selfish women basically weaponize their children. It's disgraceful and it should be illegal. You can imagine the mental health impact there. More often than not, that results in suicide. There are, I have to say, cases as well where you get selfish men who commit suicide, but they take their family with them, and that's despicable. But let me know your thoughts. Why is it Why do you think that the ratio of male suicides is so much higher? Because I think this is a very important area to look at, and there hasn't really been that much public debate on it. It's often quoted, but what are the reasons? It's not good enough to say, oh, it's depression. Women can be depressed as well. So what are the reasons? Let me know your thoughts.